All right, Judges chapter 2. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept, and they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there to the Lord. When Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years, and they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And the people of the Lord did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by the groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and were more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he said, Because this people has transgressed my covenant that I commanded their fathers, and have not obeyed my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations that Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will take care to walk in the way of the Lord as their fathers did or not. So the Lord left those nations, not driving them out quickly, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. So the Bible is sometimes read as a series of disconnected stories that are meant to portray, in one sense, like a moral point, such as Aesop's fables, or maybe even the Book of Virtues. But read this way, the point of the Bible is basically to find that moral nugget or that principle to live by in each character or story, and then imitate that in your own life. But this way of reading the Bible always runs into some serious problems, because some of the stories and characters, they don't seem to have anything that's virtuous to imitate. In fact, some stories leave us so baffled when we read the Bible, looking for who to imitate and how to live, that we just shy away from these sorts of stories or books. And this happens in the Old Testament especially. The book of Judges is one of those books. The book of Judges was not written at all to be moralistic or to have some sort of long-lasting hero that you could look to. In fact, the book itself is a polemic against one particular tribe and why the leadership of Benjamin was rejected through King Saul. Okay, it's a book about lack of leadership. Okay, if you read toward the end, 3 times it says there was no king. in that time. Okay, that's one of the driving statements of the purpose of the book, because there was no king. Therefore, all of this happened. Okay? The book itself was written either during or after the Davidic dynasty as a polemical work against poor leadership, especially anything that comes out of Benjamin. As well, it's a polemic for Judah and for the leadership that comes out of this tribe, namely David, who emerges as the leader who unites all of Israel. The book of Judges, it's full of all kinds of bad news and testimonies to human depravity, but we're going to delve into this period. We're going to see first, those of you just coming in, we have no note outline on paper, but the outline is right up there. Okay, so we're going to delve into first, we're going to look at their spiritual decline. Okay, basically asking the question, how did it go this far? How did we get to this point where people were doing what it is that they were doing? Okay, then we're going to look at Israel's sins and their temporary saviors. Okay, the work of the judges. And then lastly, we'll look at the true and better deliverer, the need that's created for a true and better deliverer, especially as you read this book. One thing that I was thinking about earlier today is that, if you read the book of Judges by itself, without the rest of the Bible, it is a book of hopelessness. There is no hope. Judges makes no sense by itself. It has to be written or read within the canon, and even where it's at in the canon of Scripture. So, let's delve in here. The spiritual decline. How did it go this far? As a preliminary statement about how one should read Judges, it must be said that the work cannot be read to have happened chronologically as it was written. Okay, I believe even in chapter 1, Joshua's already dead, but then I just read chapter 2, and Joshua's alive. So it's not meant to be read chronologically. Okay, rather it is a series of stories that took place between 1400 and 1100 BC. This means that many of the periods of the Judges actually overlap one another as they judged in different regions of the newly claimed land of Israel. Joshua, he's led the people into their respective territories so that they may continue to wipe out the inhabitants and fight against them. However, one of the first factors that led to the spiritual decline in Israel is the failure to complete the conquest. As you read the opening chapter of Judges, you read, for instance, you'll read that Judah drove out all those except those with chariots. That's in chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites, 121. Joseph did not drive out their inhabitants, 122 through 26. Manasseh did not drive out their inhabitants completely, 127 through 28. Ephraim did not drive out their inhabitants, verse 29. Zebulun did not drive out their inhabitants, but rather used them for forced labor, 130. Asher did not drive out their inhabitants. Naphtali used the inhabitants for forced labor, and Dan needed help, but still only used the inhabitants there for forced labor. Okay. Now, again, we've talked about the judgment and we talked about the conquest that was given to Joshua last week, and it's easy to think, well, come on now, live and let live, right? These are the peoples. They were there first. They worked so hard for all they had. They're the ones who built the cities. They're the ones who built the towns. And Israel was basically just going to go in and say, you're out, I'm in. That house, I'm living in there. That one's mine. I want that mansion. They were just going to go in there and claim territory. But Israel was supposed to be the means of God's judgment on these people. Israel was supposed to demonstrate the holiness of God, in a sense, as a consuming fire. But in allowing these people to live, they demonstrated that God not only was not regarded as holy in their sight, but rather they were willing to let the gods and the idolatrous practices of the land exist side by side with the Lord. Perhaps, maybe they thought something like, well, we can do our thing and we'll let them do their thing, and you know what, we'll all be okay, we'll all get along. But God knew that this would not be the case. You see, God had already warned His people about the snares that the people and the idols of the people, their practices, what they would be to Israel. Let's survey some of these, these prior warnings, and go through Judges to see where they failed. In Deuteronomy, chapter 20, verses 16 through 18. It says this, "But in the cities of these people that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites and the Amorites, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded." And listen to the reason. "That they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God." That is, in a sense, these people were so corrupt and so abominable that to touch the people of God would basically make them unclean. These practices would rub off on them. The people were not to learn the abominable practices. Now, if you recall from Leviticus, there are only a few sins that God calls abominable. Okay, that is, not every single sin that's listed is called abominable. There's only a few. Okay, in Leviticus 18, we see in particular that sexual perversions, such as having an affair with the married person, homosexuality, bestiality, incestual relationships, that is called intergenerational love today, pederasty, polyamory, along with child sacrifice, these in particular are called abominations in Leviticus 18:26. Leviticus 18:29 further says, "For everyone who does any of them shall be cut off from among their people." And in Judges 19:22 through 28, we read the account of the tribe of Benjamin and their treatment of a Levite priest and his concubine. Okay, the story, if you read it, was reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah. The men of Gibeah, okay, they were of the tribe of Benjamin. This is Saul's tribe. Okay, so here you can see the polemic that this book had against Benjamin and against particularly Saul's leadership. Okay, but the men of Gibeah, they wanted to have homosexual relations with the Levite priest. He walks into town, and a guy sees him in the town square, and he's like, "Oh, we're just passing through." No, please come inside. And the whole town, they gather. They're outside this man's door, who's trying to be a nice guy, but he knows what's going to happen. I mean, it's Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. And they're knocking at the door, and they're telling him to come out. And this guy says, "Here you can have my 2 virgin daughters, and here you can have his concubine." And the men are okay with it. The priest is okay with it. A priest of the Lord, he's okay with it. And this is one of the saddest accounts in the Bible. It says, "And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning." She died from being raped and humiliated all night long by that entire town. The men of Israel, this is Benjamin. This is the tribe of Benjamin. These were not the inhabitants. This is Benjamin, God's chosen nation, committing abominations that they were told would happen if they did not drive out the inhabitants. It's kind of ironic, they couldn't drive out the Jebusites, and the priest actually wanted to go around the Jerusalem, with the land of the Jebusites. He wanted to go around because he didn't want to have any entanglements. And yet, the place that he went to, where he thought he would be the safest with his own, he wasn't. Some irony in there. The Bible is very real about the moral failures of people. It doesn't pull any punches when it comes to human sin. This is why the conquest was so important. It wasn't about merciless killing for the sake of being wrathful or just being, God being angry and vengeful or anything like that. It was about God protecting His treasured possession. It was about God protecting His bride, protecting His wife. Be careful who you hang out with. Be careful who your friends are. Choose wisely how you spend your time. The world is constantly committing abominations before God, and if we're not careful with our own thinking, we might end up endorsing them. For instance, there are Christians, and I'm putting that in quotes for sure, today, who will say that homosexual marriages should be legalized, who say that homosexuality is completely compatible with Christianity. There are Christians who say that our form of child sacrifice, abortion, is okay. Since it's legal, after all, it must be okay. God must approve of it, Or who will give in to the sexual culture that we live in and many other crazy things, everybody here knows the world. We all live in it, we all see it, The world, it's always teaching. It never stops. The people of Israel were not supposed to learn these ways. That is why they were commanded to drive them out. As another warning, In Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 4, Moses warned the people. He said this. He said, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it and clear away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than yourselves, when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly." Joshua himself delivered the same warning on the eve of his own death. In Joshua chapter 23, verses 11 through 13, he says this. He's basically on his deathbed. He says, "Be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God." Interesting, right? Be very careful to love the Lord your God. "For if you turn your back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among you, and make marriages with them, so that you associate with them these nations, and they with you, so that you associate with them, they with you, okay? Know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a whip on your sides and thorn in your eyes, until you perish from off this good ground that the Lord your God has given you." Marriage has that kind of power. Marriage has a life-shaping power, a life-changing power. It was designed that way. Okay, and God knows this because God is the one who made marriage. Marriage has the purpose of becoming one flesh. That is basically 2 people becoming so intimately connected emotionally, financially, psychologically, spiritually, and physically that they, in a sense, become one person. Okay, for this reason, God told the people that they should not marry these and hence become spiritually connected with idolaters, because they would turn them away from the covenant to serve idols. In Judges 3:6, we read, "And their daughters they took for themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods." What does this say to us today? But be careful who you marry. Be careful who your sons or your daughters marry. Marriage will either get you closer to God or it will get you further away from Him. But there is no neutral ground in one of the most important relationships that God has created and designed. God supremely cares who you marry. God supremely cares who you marry. Many times, we say that, well, it's our hearts should have the final say, and, we talk about love and how we should follow our hearts, but clearly, God is the one who needs to have the final say. For the Christian, God is the one who needs to have the final say. Marriage is it's about more than just love. Marriage is actually about faithfulness to God. Marriage, in one sense, is a life test about faithfulness to God. What a word this says to anybody, to us, to me, anybody who is considering marriage or anybody who already is married. Anybody who already is married needs to heed this as well. We have to ask questions. People who are married, do you worship with your spouse? If you're not, great, you're single, you worship with the covenant community, period. If you're dating, do you worship with the person that you're dating? Do you worship with that person? Or do you have your own spirituality and then they have their own? Are you a believer and they're not? Every religion basically sees this as the most practical thing. Okay? Muslims tell Muslims, marry another Muslim. Okay? Roman Catholics tell Roman Catholics, marry another Roman Catholic. Protestants usually tell Protestants, marry another Protestant. Okay? An atheist probably tells, marry another atheist. Why? Because it's a lot more compatible. They'll either get you closer to your religion or further from it, no matter what it is. And if they get you, if one person gets closer and the other one doesn't, then you distance each other from the relationship. It's a very profound thing. In the Old Testament, or in the New Testament rather, you see the commands. You see them. Don't be unequally yoked. Don't be unequally yoked. Another warning that was given to the people that would lead to their decline was given by Joshua before his death as they were set to take over the land. This one's in Joshua 23, verses 15 through 16. He said, "But just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he has destroyed you from off this good land that the Lord your God has given you, if you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he has commanded you, and you go and serve other gods and bow down to them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and you shall perish from off the good land that he has given you." So we've seen the problem in one sense of incomplete conquest. Okay, they're marrying in, and now here's the big problem: the idols, serving the other gods and bowing down to them. The problem of other gods and idols. This was a real issue. Okay. You see, in one sense, Martin Luther said this, and I think correctly, all other sins, if you at least start off with the Ten Commandments, okay, all other sins cannot be committed without first breaking the first commandment, which is not having any other gods before the Lord. Okay, basically, you need to commit idolatry before you're going to commit any other sin. Once you replace God and you put something else in there, then it becomes easy to break any other commandment. Idolatry was the greatest snare for the people of Israel. It was built into them, and in one sense, as Adam, their first covenant head, before Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, he was the first person who removed God out of his rightful place in his heart. Adam was the first person who exalted himself against God to serve himself and make up his own rules, to make up his own right and wrong. At least as our human covenant head, okay? Yes, definitely Satan was the very first idolater in that respect, okay? But as far as humans go and where we get it from, it's because of Adam. It's because of the corruption that we've inherited from him. So idolatry, even today, is still our greatest and our most pervasive sin. Now, our idolatry is not so obvious as it was for the Israelites to, in a sense, with statues and stuff like that. Okay, although that does still exist. Okay, but an idol is anything, anyone, any place, any idea that can and does command an ultimate allegiance. Okay, anything, anyone, any place, any idea that we get our identity from, that we look to for salvation, that we look to and say, if I just had that thing in my life, I would be complete, happy, fulfilled. Okay, anything that isn't God, that we bow down to in our heart of hearts, that commands our allegiance, that is an idol. An idol is anything that we say that we believe that we can't live without. So you can see, there's in one sense, so how you can see the people of Israel, how they could have turned something that God created like sex into an idol, or the pleasure derived from it into an idol. They could have turned personal happiness into an idol. I don't want to be in war. I want to have peace. And, I just want to farm my crops. I just want to do that. Their idol could have been comfort, not having to live that lifestyle of war. Their idol could have been beauty. It could have been their own survival, fearing death in war. It could have been their own prosperity. As many of the gods of the inhabitants, the Baals, these were connected to agriculture and prospering one's crop yield and such. Okay, the basic idea or premise behind Baalism was that he's a god that you need to go to if you want your crops to grow, if you want to yield a good produce. Okay, if you want your cattle to reproduce. Okay, you don't want your cattle having miscarriages or anything like that. You need to go to Baal, and that was the religion of Baal at the time. And so it was tempting when they would see, hey, we're experiencing famine over here, and you guys aren't. What's your secret? Oh, Baal. Baal is the one that we go to, and that's how that they could be tempted into it that way. But and they were looking at their own, maybe their prosperity. Well, we want more. You guys seem to have a lot more. So the first step toward the spiritual decline of the people, it was their partial obedience to the commands of the Lord to drive out the inhabitants. Because they didn't drive them out, they intermarried with them. Because they didn't drive them out, they engaged in their idolatry. whether they could not or would not, because of their unwillingness, they just decided to marry and syncretize with everybody. Like, some of them had trouble. We read that Judah drove out everybody except the ones with chariots. Israel's on foot. They don't have horse. Versus a chariot, kind of tough. So they did the best that they could. Other places, there was no excuse. It was just like, would you rather die or be labor? We'll be labor. Okay. And it was, some people just went that route. Judges 2:10 says, all the generation, okay, this was the initial warring one, okay, they were also gathered to their fathers. And now this is interesting. It says, they were gathered to their fathers, and now here, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, or the work that he had done for Israel. This, to me, is one of the saddest statements in Judges. It is the neglect of the children. From the beginning, God has included children in his covenant dealings with men. Recall that the first commands to Adam and Eve, they were to be fruitful and multiply. Okay, that was not just a physical reproduction, but also a spiritual one as well. It was a spiritual multiplication. Recall that when God saved Noah, he not only saved him, he saved his sons and their wives as well. In Genesis 18:19, when God was deliberating whether or not to include Abraham in his counsel regarding what he would do with Sodom and Gomorrah, he said this. He said that he had chosen Abraham, quote unquote, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. The children were to be included. Recall some of the passages from Deuteronomy about parenting and passing down knowledge of the covenant to the people of Israel. I'll go through quite a few here. In Deuteronomy 4, verses 9 through 10. It says, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, the Lord said to Moses, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children also. In Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 through 8, it says, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and they shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Now, lest we take that too far, that is hyperbolic language. But the idea behind that is that the home of God's people is supposed to be so God-saturated that it should be an easy thing to talk about Christ in the Christian home. It shouldn't be one of those things, it's like, no, pues how's the Jesus thing in your life? It shouldn't be like that. The Christian home should be a place, where parents can talk freely, with their kids about God, and just engage in conversation. What's God doing in your life? Well, blah, blah, talk about the attributes of God. There's plenty of tools out there for Christian parenting, nowadays. But notice God's concern for the children. When all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God, this is Deuteronomy 31, so this is already at the end. Deuteronomy 31, 11 through 13. It says, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, and little ones, and the sojourner within your towns, that they may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, and be careful to do all the words of this law, and that their children who have not known it may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God, as long as you live in the land that you are going over the Jordan to possess. And the last one, Deuteronomy 32, 46 and 47. He said to them, take heart to all the words by which I am warning you today, that you may command them to your children, that they may be careful to do all the words of this law. For it is no empty word for you, but your very life. And by this word you shall live long in the land that you are going over to the Jordan to possess. God has a very grave concern for the children. He's always included them. I mean, really, the point cannot be overstated. God's covenant includes the children of believers. That's why I'm Presbyterian. No, I'm kidding. I'm not throwing. I'm not throwing that in there. That's funny. Okay, but Christian parents. Okay, Christian parents, they have the responsibility of raising their children in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. Nowadays, and in some non-covenantal theologies, it's quite common in one sense to take this Western or individualistic approach to faith and basically say things of their kids like, yeah, well, you know what, they have to learn, they have to grow up, and they're going to have to make up their own minds when they grow up about what they're going to believe and what they're not going to believe. There's almost, and even outside of the Christian home, there's this kind of hands-off approach when it comes to parenting. You know, it's like, well, I mean, let them grow up. That's what they go to school. It's the school's responsibility to teach my child. No. No, the Bible actually places responsibility for teaching children not on an educational system, but on the home. On the home first. Parenting, if it's going to be called Christian, cannot take a passive approach to the faith of their children. It cannot. Christian parent, God charges you, not your pastor, not the Sunday school teacher, and not anybody else, to raise your children in the ways of God and in the knowledge of God. And without it, you see it. You know, when we wonder, well, why is this generation turning out the way it is? Because somebody's, we missed it. We missed it. In a sense, we assume that faith can just be handed down, through genes. It's not. It's not. It's handed down through teaching. There are teachings in the church that can be long forgotten if they're not retaught to every single generation. They have to be transmitted that way. And so Israel forgot God. Judges 2:11 through 15 says that they served the Baals. They provoked God to anger so that God himself was against them. So this is Israel's sin. Another facet for understanding Judges is the repetitive cycle that is seen. It goes something like this. Okay, this is a cycle that you see. Basically, the people are at peace or at rest. Okay. Then the people, they forget God and they serve the idols. And then 3, the people are handed over by God to their enemies. Okay, they undergo what is called a judicial hardening. Okay. The people, they're oppressed, some for long periods of time, some for short periods of time. But at some point, the people cry out to God. Okay, and then 5, God raises up a judge to deliver the people, and then repeat cycle. All over again. People are at rest or peace. Boom. Idols. Boom. Oppression. They're handed over. Boom. They cry out. A judge. Repeat cycle. Rest. And that's pretty much the pattern that develops in Judges that comes out. So that helps to understand the work as well. Now, the judges of Israel. Okay. These guys are really interesting people. That's all I got to say. Okay. They had some very unusual methods, and a couple of them are going to raise questions, and I had to really dig in on some commentaries. These were interesting, but it needs to be said, one, that the judges presented, these were not national leaders. Okay, they were not national leaders. They were not religious leaders either. Neither were they theological leaders. Okay. They were basically, they were just locals. Okay, they were just locals from various tribes who God used to bring peace through warfare to different regions in the newly acquired land of Israel. I'm not going to be able to detail all the judges and their stories. That's beyond the purpose of this sermon, beyond the scope. But I want to point out something that the author wanted us all to see. Okay, basically, I want to point out what they left us longing for. So let me survey the judges very quickly. Okay, so here we go. Judge number 1. Judge number 1 is Othniel. Okay, he is from the tribe of Judah. This is going to be an important detail later. He's from the tribe of Judah. His tale is recorded in Judges 3, verses 7 through 11. He is the first mentioned, and there's a sense in which he is presented as an ideal kind of judge. Okay? It's mentioned, one, that the Spirit of God comes upon him explicitly to go to war. Okay? And his victory brought rest to the land for 40 years. Okay? It's a very short story, but the interesting thing about him, at least, and here's another detail, you have what would be called major judges and minor judges. That is, some of the major judges, they're only called major judges because you see more detail in their story. And there's some judges that say so-and-so judged in Israel 40 years, and that's all the detail that you get. Okay, but Othniel's presented first. He's an ideal, in that he doesn't really have anything. There's nothing negative about him afterwards. Some of the other judges, their history is laid out. Okay, here's one. Okay, judge number 2. This is Ehud of the tribe of Benjamin. His tale is recorded in Judges 3 verses 12 through 30. Now Ehud, he murders King Eglon, okay, in a rather interesting series of events, the way it all unfolds and stuff like that. But this is the way that it was understood by early Jewish commentators, or by early Jewish accounts, was that basically Ehud used a homosexual advance to get the king alone, and then he knifed him. It was interesting. I had to really dig into that because I was like, what? I've never heard that. But apparently it's very clear in the Hebrew. There's a very interesting play on words that's happening there. And even the king, he's actually described with the feminine pronoun when it describes him. I was like, okay, well, all right, I'm going to trust the commentators on that one. We'll get to that one in the question and answer session, okay? Judge number 3 is Shamgar. Okay, he's more than likely a non-Israelite. It says that he is a son of Anath, the Canaanite warrior goddess. Okay, his tale is rather brief. It only gets one passage. Okay, in Judges 3:31, that's all he gets. His only feat was killing. All right, that's real small. His only feat was killing 600 Philistines. But basically he was kind of pointing to Samson's further defeat of the Philistines and anticipating David's utter defeat of the Philistines. Okay. Judge number 4 is Deborah from the tribe of Ephraim. Okay, her tale is recorded in Judges 4 through 5. Now, as part of her tale, and this is another one of those interesting things that I was like, okay, all right. But as part of her tale, Jael, okay, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she's a married woman. Okay, she lures Sisera, who's the commander of the king of King Jabin's army, into her tent. She wearies him out through sex, and then she drives a tent peg through the temple of his head. Okay, and in the Hebrew, apparently there is so much irony in there, it's not even funny. Okay, Deborah and Jael are exalted in this tale because male leadership is lacking in Israel. That's how bad things were by this point. And if I remember the story too, when the person that's actually kind of raised up to go and fight against Sisera, he's kind of like, maybe. And Deborah's like, let's get up and go. And she's the one that has to take charge. Judge number 5 is Gideon of Manasseh. His tale is recorded in Judges 6 through 8, with a tale of one of his sons in chapter 9. Okay, now Gideon, I like to say, he's the tale of the real 300 who conquered an army that could not be counted. After his great military victories, Gideon, however, he showed himself to be vengeful and prideful in his second campaign, taking personal vengeance. He went and wiped out an entire town, basically because they wouldn't let him pass. Okay, they wouldn't help him out, and so he went and took care of business, came back, and just said, "You guys are gone." Okay, it's noticeable in the text that the Lord is not mentioned in that second battle. Okay, that is, the Lord's not, in a sense, the text is trying to say the Lord's not with him when he's doing that. Okay, they tried to make Gideon king, but he refused. Instead, he made a golden ephod. Okay, like there's a golden garment. Okay, that was a snare and caused Israel, what the text says, to whore after it. That is, they worshipped it. They worshipped it. It became an idol. His son, of one of his concubines, then goes on a killing spree, killing 70 of his own brothers. Okay, Killed 70 of his own brothers. Okay, so Gideon was a busy man. He had 70 kids all over the place, apparently. And this one was sent off because he was the son of a concubine. And he came back, and he's like, I'm going AWOL on my family here. It's a really sad tale. Again, there's not a whole lot to imitate in this book. Okay? He attempted to make himself king in doing that, but that didn't go well for him at all. Judges 6 and 7. This is Tola and Jair of Gilead Manasseh. Their brief history is in chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. These judged in Ephraim and in Gilead, or Manasseh. Okay, they judged, but there is silence on whether or not they were able to bring rest to the land. Okay, it just says that they judged. It's noteworthy that no judge after Gideon is said to have brought rest. That is, you don't see that element anymore. Rather, afterward, they appear, in one sense, commentators say that they appear to be governors of sort. Okay, that is probably, there wasn't warfare. That's why they didn't bring rest, because there wasn't warfare. It just kind of became the normal thing. Like, they ruled as judges. They ruled as as some sort of city official whenever people came to them with problems and stuff like that. That's how they ended up ruling, almost as functional tribal leaders. Maybe if you want to look at it that way. Okay. Noticeable with the minor judges, I've already mentioned, the cycle isn't present. Okay, that is that you just see that there's just this period of judging. Okay, that whole cycle isn't present. It's just they judged in Israel. It doesn't say that they sinned and they were handed over and all that stuff. It just says that they judged in Israel. Okay, so it seems to say that cycle wasn't the only thing that was happening everywhere in Israel. That is, there were pockets of places where there seems to have been some stability, okay, and hence no need, in a sense, for a visible kingdom that the people would later cry out for. Okay, in some places things were okay. Okay, so the whole place hadn't gone corrupt. There was still some life in pockets of places. Judge number 8. Is Jephthah of Gilead Manasseh. His sad tale is recorded in Judges 11. After making a vow to God to sacrifice whatever comes out of his house first, when he gets home, he's granted victory over his enemies, only to come home and to have his young virgin daughter step out of the house. Daddy, I'm so glad you're home. And he is so sad because the vow that he made was, God, I will sacrifice to you the first thing that comes out of that house. And it was his own daughter, and the text doesn't say whether or not he actually went and sacrificed her, just says that she wanted to go away for a couple of months to mourn her virginity. Commentators are kind of split. Some say I wouldn't put it past if he did. People were like that in that time, but also I wouldn't doubt it if he didn't, since people did what was right in their own eyes. And if they didn't want to keep an oath to the Lord, well, then they didn't want to keep an oath to the Lord. So there's a sense of which it could have gone both ways. Either way, it's a really sad tale. Judges 9, 10, and 11 are Isban, Elon, and Abdon of either Judah or Zebulun and Ephraim. Okay, their brief tale of these minor judges in chapter 12, verses 8 through 15. Again, these appear to have ruled through governance and not as deliverers. Okay, they were not deliverers through warfare, though some warfare certainly would not and should not be excluded, but we're not told of great military campaigns like some of the other major judges. And judge number 12, the last one, Samson of the tribe of Dan. His tale takes up Judges 13 through 16. Samson, he's a womanizer. Okay, he's proud, he's arrogant, and he's a show-off. Okay, but the Spirit of the Lord was said to have come upon him, like the only other person that it came upon was Othniel. Okay, Samson's moral character certainly has nothing worth imitating. Hebrews, however, does record that he had faith, and that through faith he conquered. His tale ends with the self-sacrificing of his life in order to deal a major blow to the Philistines. Now, looking over the lives of most of these judges, there is a lot that seems to be lacking in leadership in Israel. Okay, there's a lot. Okay, for one, there's no central government. There's basically just these territories that are governed by these judges, or that are delivered by these judges. But even more noticeable are their moral failings. in regards to the big story, we ask the question here, where is the seed of the woman that will deliver the people of Israel from the seed of the serpent? Why are Israel's leaders acting like the seeds of the serpent in their idolatry and moral failings? With the judges, we come to realize the reality of the words of the psalmist in Psalm 146:5 that says, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day, his plans perish." In Judges 2:19, it points us in that way. It says that whenever the judge died, the people returned to their idolatry, and even worse, in some instances, you get this sense as you're reading Judges that the people only cried out to God because they wanted to go back to the peaceful time in their idolatry. They didn't want to go back to the peacetime of serving the Lord. They went right back to idolatry. That's what they really wanted. They didn't want the peace of God. They wanted the peace that their idols offered without the consequences from God that their idolatry would bring. Now, concerning these judges, what does this tell us? But that though God does give his people some rulers who do great things, we cannot look to them as saviors. They are but men, and it's quite common to have, even for us, to have Christian heroes. To have heroes of the past. To have a favorite preacher, a favorite teacher. Okay? Indeed, we have to say, yes, we're thankful for great preachers and teachers in the history of the church and who are around today, but we cannot put our trust in them so that they become infallible and they become idolized. Okay? We can't do that. The Roman Catholic Church, for instance, in one sense, idolizes the office of the papacy as God's appointed means of infallible rule on earth. But they're not the only ones. It's very possible, in fact, people do it, for Protestants to have a pet preacher who can do no wrong. To have that one preacher who can make no error. And basically he becomes a functional pope. Sometimes we can idolize time periods, in church history. Well, if only it was like the good old days, when everybody brought their Bible to church and stuff like that, and sometimes, that age probably never even existed, and even today, I want to go back to the time of the Church of the Apostles. Like, wait, have you read 1 Corinthians? Things weren't as golden as you think. They had a lot of problems. You read the epistles, you see the infighting between the Jews and Gentiles. It wasn't more ideal. It wasn't. You just had these awesome leaders, but they can't be turned into idols either. They can't be turned into idols. For people to have their favorite internet apologist, to have their favorite person who's the one who gives them all their information as far as who's right and who's wrong, who's preaching false doctrine and who's not. This is funny. I was, every now and then I get involved in these little conversations about things that are going on out there. I don't like to because sometimes most of the time they really do detract from the focus of the gospel. But this one person was using a heretic just to prove one person wrong. And it was like, if you're willing to use anything to debunk people, even somebody that's false, to debunk somebody just because you don't like him, it's like you're turning in a sense trying to be doctrinally perfect into an idol. It'd be called doctrinal Pharisaism, being a doctrinal Pharisee. That's a very real thing when people exalt truth and exalt being right over the righteousness of Christ. That can be a very, very real thing. If one ever investigates the character of people, we're always going to find flaws in people. So we can't put our hopes in there ultimately. Without getting into too much of the historical details, Puritans, you look at golden periods, okay? You can't forget the stain of the witch hunts as far as the Puritan period. You can't forget that. The Middle Ages are stained with the blood of the Crusades. Even people like John Calvin, a leader and a major player in the Reformation, and whom we owe much of modern Christian thinking to, he has the offense of Michael Servetus on his record. The Roman Catholic Church is long stained with conspiracy and sexual scandals. Protestants are no different here. Like Israel, the ones who look to who for salvation, once since they exalt having, again, perfect doctrine, absolutely perfect worship services. Okay, we have to have absolutely perfect music. There needs to be an absolutely perfect youth group. A perfect singles group, etc. They're all sinners. They're still sinners. You're a sinner. I'm a sinner. The real enemy is not, the real problem is not this lack of a golden age. And even the people for judges, in a sense, there was no king in those days, but not having a king wasn't the real problem. Sin was the real problem. That was the real enemy. It's our sin. It's the nature that we've inherited from Adam. For the people of Israel, they should have been crying out not for deliverance from their circumstances, but from their sin. So Israel needed a much more powerful deliverer than any of these judges could be. And let me just be clear right off the bat here that the true and better deliverer that was needed was nothing short of God Himself. Nothing short of God Himself. The situation is basically so bad that only God and not man can save Israel. And yet the deliverer, he would be one of the seeds of the woman, as promised in Genesis 3:15. So what kind of man would this be? In Judges, the glimpse that we get, of what kind of person is needed, we see it in Othniel, and we see it in Samson, and that is, we need a deliverer upon whom the Spirit of the Lord will come upon. Okay? Now, for Othniel and Samson and anybody in the Old Testament, the Spirit would only come in portion or for only a period of time, and then that was it. Okay, he would come and be with them just to do the work, but then there was no mention of him afterwards. Othniel, Samson is not an ideal, but Othniel, he's presented as the ideal kind of judge, as a kind of judge to be longed for and desired, and that basically his story is so simple. This is why, in one sense, it reads perfect. Okay, Israel's in trouble. God raised up a man by giving him His Spirit to accomplish all that God intended for him to do in order to bring God's deliverance and peace back to the people of God. He was a man who was not afraid of war. Indeed, he ran to it for the glory of God through judgment on his enemies and the people of God, resulting in the salvation of God's people from oppression. Othniel, in that sense, is the ideal kind of judge. He's the ideal kind of leader. In him Othniel, and again, he's of Judah. Okay, Othniel of Judah. In him we get a small glimpse of the person and work of Jesus Christ, who is the true and better Savior. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. You see, Jesus Christ, just like Othniel, he was called, and he was raised up by God the Father to be the Savior and deliverer of all those who were enslaved and oppressed, not by nations, but to their sin. The true and more dangerous enemy and oppressor. Jesus, like Othniel, was given the Spirit of God, but more so than Othniel, the Spirit comes upon Jesus and it rests upon him. Okay, it doesn't just come up in a sense like you'll see phrases like the hand of the Lord was upon him or the Spirit came upon him. Okay, but in Jesus the Spirit rests upon him. Jesus was given the Spirit without measure, according to John 3:34. It was through the power of the Spirit that he was led to wage war on Satan in the wilderness. 40 days and 40 nights there without food. That's where he waged this war. He started there, and it's interesting. In the Gospel accounts it says that the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. Jesus went to war. That was his first declaration of war, right after he was baptized, right after the Spirit came upon him. Just like Othniel, the Spirit came upon him for war. Othniel, he went out to deliver the people of God through warfare by taking life. But on the cross, Jesus Christ was waging warfare by giving his life. Othniel, he only sacrificed time away from family to go out to war, but on the cross, Jesus Christ, he sacrificed the very relationship with his Father to become sin for us so that we could become the righteousness of God in him. Othniel, he went out to judge and wage a military campaign to become the judge and deliverer, but on the cross, Jesus Christ, he was judged. He was judged to be God's enemy in our place, and in doing that, he has been made the highest judge who will come again to wage war on the enemies of God and on God's people. In Revelation 19, Jesus Christ, he's described as coming to judge and to make war for one last time. Othniel could only give the land rest for 40 years, but Jesus Christ, he's won an everlasting rest, an everlasting peace. And this rest doesn't just go for a small portion of Israel. This rest is going to go out to the entirety of all creation. The entire cosmos is going to be filled with rest. There's going to be no crying, no pain, no death, no sorrow, nothing at all that would bring pain or suffering in any kind of way. Jesus is the one who brings the true rest that we all need. In Christ, God the Father, he raised up the most powerful deliverer that he could, the one who was anointed by the Holy Spirit of God. Indeed, in Christ, we see the entire triune God coming together to do whatever it takes to rescue God's people who will cry out to him when they are oppressed by their sins. When we see ourselves suffering, we cry out to him, and Jesus Christ will always prove himself to be the true and better deliverer. Amen.